Namaskar. India's economic future hangs in the balance. On one side is a decent overall GDP growth rate, maintained over decades. On the other side is a veritable sea of youth unable to find good jobs. In the race between growth and unemployment, the winner will determine the future of India. Change requires us to strike the right balance between hope and reality. Our youth certainly need to be inspired about the future of the country. At the same time, we must know where we actually stand, so we tackle the many problems that are really there rather than imagining them away. In this video series, we have tried to lay out the truth about the Indian economy using data which typically comes from government sources. When you look at the data in different ways, as we have, they reveal a picture that clever data manipulation or reinterpretation cannot hide. So let us start first by acknowledging the good work that has been put in by the state over the last few decades. We have been building roads, ports, railway networks, and we're doing so today faster than before. Our accessible digital stack is the envy of the world. The goods and services tax, as well as the bankruptcy code, have helped streamline the economy. And the public provision by the government of bank accounts, of toilets, of tap water, electricity, and direct benefits transfer has certainly improved the quality of the lives of people. The economy, too, is recovering. Despite the enormous economic setback as we fought COVID, India has grown steadily since. Service exports have boomed post-pandemic, and this new structure called the Global Capability Center is being set up by multinational corporations in India. We are steadily moving up the value chain as a result. Some firms like Apple and Tesla are coming to India to reduce their dependence on China and to serve the Indian market. And of course, we've told the story of firms like Lenskart and Tilfy, which have sprung up at the intersection of services and manufacturing and are creating new jobs. But the reality is that much more needs to be done for India to reach a robust middle-income country status by 2047, which is 100 years after independence from colonial rule. To see why this journey requires us to make a tremendous effort, let me recapitulate some of the facts in our videos. India has not fully recovered from the pandemic. As we saw, if you draw a line growing at 6% from early 2016, that line today shows where our GDP should be if it had grown smoothly. In fact, our GDP today is significantly below that line, suggesting we still have ground to cover. Recent GDP growth numbers in excess of 8% are likely to be overestimates. The actual growth rate is probably closer to 6%. This is corroborated by the low consumption growth rate obtained from other government surveys. Low consumption growth when overall GDP growth is higher suggests that income growth is not evenly distributed. The low and middle income households in our population are hurting. As we saw, vehicle sales are evidence of unequal income growth. Two-wheelers, which are typically bought by the middle class, are not selling strongly, while luxury car sales are rising very fast. Government economists claim this is because a prosperous middle class is upgrading to cars. But this is just silly reasoning. If it were indeed the case that the middle class were prosperous, many more of them would buy scooters and motorcycles first, and we simply don't see that. One reason the middle class is hurting is because of the lack of jobs, something we started this video with. Production in India is moving from small and medium industries, which are much more labor-intensive, to more capital-intensive sectors where large business houses dominate. No wonder the stock market is doing so well, even while the middle class is not. Indeed, 12 of 23 sectors that compose the index of industrial production are lower today than they were in 2016, And these are the most employment-intensive industries like leather and textiles. No wonder we're not creating enough jobs. The job crisis, therefore, is very real. Jobs are growing only in two sectors, agriculture and construction. And of course, job growth in agriculture is really unusual for a country which is growing at our pace. Many more women are moving into agriculture and men into construction, even as the share of manufacturing and services in jobs shrinks. Unpaid or self-employed work is the fastest growing category of worker. And as we've argued, these don't reflect a sudden explosion of entrepreneurship in India, but actually reflect many people taking to distressed work. As further evidence of distress, the spending on NREGA, a form of rural income support, has not come down to pre-pandemic levels. It is still very high. Indeed, recognizing the stress, the government has continued the supply of free food grains to 80 crore people. And of course, the poor are taking their children out of private schools to put them in government schools because they can no longer afford fees. This is especially worrisome since the pandemic has set back learning outcomes for our children. We cannot be a prosperous country if so many of our children are learning so poorly. Now, if the environment was as good as the government and the mainstream press tell us it is, we would see private sector investment and foreign direct investment exploding. While businesses certainly make announcements every day in the newspapers telling us what they're going to do, hard data suggests private investment has been stagnant and FDI is declining as a share of GDP. In short, growth, while reasonable, is not enough to make India rich before the country grows old, and it certainly is not reaching enough people. India is shining in parts, but not for many of its citizens. We, the people, have a way to fight for the right policies. It is called democracy. India has the best chance to grow under a free and democratic dispensation. The erosion of freedom and democracy in the country should worry every citizen, for it eliminates our ability to vote for change when the government messes up. Indeed, the lack of press freedom prevents the government from even knowing when it's going off track, as it also prevents the public from knowing when the government is going off track. India cannot afford to become authoritarian. As we go to elections, it is clear that whether it's a third term for the current government or a new term for the current opposition, the economic challenge for the next government is going to be massive. The current path we're on is inadequate for all the reasons we have pointed out. The country simply cannot become a victim of its own hype. So what remedies do we suggest? In our recent book, Rohit Lamba and I have laid down a possible model for India going forward. Governance reforms are at the top of the agenda. First and foremost is decentralization. India cannot be ruled from the national capital or even from the state capitals. China succeeded in large part because its governance and economic policies were heavily decentralized. So no matter how hard your prime minister or chief ministers work, they cannot deliver good health and education to your children because these are best managed at the local level. A second aim must be to restore autonomy to our institutions and checks and balances on the government. For example, the Competition Commission, the CBI, the ED, the Election Commission, the Judiciary, and even Parliament need to have more autonomy to restore the semblance of checks and balances in our country. Almost surely this will happen only if we have a strong opposition, whether it is the BJP or the India coalition. Finally, we should not bias towards any particular growth path. In our book, we have deplored the current bias towards manufacturing. It certainly is a myth that only manufacturing can create the jobs that India needs. But rather than advocate a bias towards services, we need to be open to any growth path. The most important impediment to India's rise is the quality of our human capital. We must have a healthier, better educated, and better trained citizenry. That is what the next government should focus on rather than trying to pick winners among sectors or amongst the companies in the country. So, as India elects a new government, it is important that you, the citizen, while being optimistic about India's future, do not assume that a glorious future is baked in. Do not also assume there is inevitability about who will lead us there. Keep an open mind, ask questions, and look for answers yourself. The mainstream media is too timid for the most part to do it, so you have to do it on your own. I am supremely optimistic about India's future, especially given the numbers and enthusiasm of our youth. As I've said elsewhere, they have a Virat Kohli mentality. They know and believe and are willing to do the work to show that they're second to none in the world. But we need to give them a chance. And that means we must fight for their future rather than constantly focus on reenacting battles of the past. We must use data to inform our debates rather than relying on cheap sound bites which are not based on any facts. If these videos have informed you and allow you to spur discussion about the future, they will have fulfilled their intended purpose. If you like them, share them widely. And thanks very much for listening. We hope you are a better informed voter in the crucial elections that lie ahead. Thank you.